a royal welcome. What does it look like? Well, from a fighter jet escort to a lavender carpet to Arabian horses alongside the presidential limousine. We also call that the Beast. The president, as you know, loves pageantry, and he saw plenty of it as he was welcomed to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. But far more importantly, the chess pieces of the Middle East, military, diplomatic, and investment, are moving rapidly and possibly with historic consequences. President Trump, for better or worse, is at the center of all this. The consequences for Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Turkey, and many other countries in the region, well, they could be profound. Today, Trump lifted U.S. sanctions on Syria, giving the loosely formed government arising from the murderous Assad family dictatorship a vital economic lifeline and a diplomatic seal of approval. The president also lavished praise on Saudi Arabia and heralded billions in arms sales, underscoring Trump's visibly transactional relationship with the kingdom and its de facto leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, whom he praised as a, quote, incredible man, adding, quote, there's nobody like him. Former President Biden, it's worth remembering, once sought to isolate Saudi Arabia as a pariah for its checkered human rights record, and that's being generous, and its role in the murder of U.S. journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Trump family business interests also hovered nearby this visit to Saudi Arabia. The Trump family began exploring investment opportunities during the first Trump term. The relationships have only matured since, with luxury skyscrapers, golf courses, and cryptocurrency all in the mix. Lastly, there's the jet. The Boeing 747 the government of Qatar wants to give to Trump, an opulent gift that very well may violate federal law and any sense of remaining propriety we have about such things. Qatar has financially backed Hamas, you see, and that's why another big event in the region this week, the release Monday of Idan Alexander, the last living U.S. hostage by Hamas, did not include his family meeting Trump in Qatar. It was simply too much for the Alexanders to bear. The Qatari jet may also be too much for congressional Republicans who sound on the Hill more than slightly queasy about the spectacle and the perceived ethical sludge that might come with it. Finn Gómez and Aaron Navarro are covering the president's trip. Let's start tonight with Aaron Navarro at the White House. Aaron, what's on your mind?
Major, good to be with you. I think the big news out of about that hour-long speech that the president gave at that summit in Saudi Arabia was the announcement of the removing of sanctions on Syria. These are sanctions that have been in place since the civil war in Syria started around 2011 and really hampered the nation's economy that just got out of the Bashar al-Assad regime a couple months ago. But President Trump, in his speech announcing it, said that these sanctions were, quote, brutal and crippling and served as an important function at the time. But now it's time for the country to, quote, shine, talking about the country shining economically, growing economically, which really tied into Trump's whole speech and vision for the Middle East that he said at that summit, talking about how the Middle East should be defined by, quote, commerce, not chaos. He really praised Saudi Arabia and economic developments they've made, at one point saying that it's the other, quote, hottest country in the world right now, praising, as you mentioned, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And all of this coming as President Trump is expected to at least say hello to the new Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa tomorrow in Saudi Arabia, according to the White House. Notable that the U.S. in the first place is looking to normalize relations with Syria, and comes at a time when you see conflicts in Gaza as well as the ongoing negotiations with Iran.
Aaron Navarro at the White House, thank you very much. Finn Gómez joins me now here at the D.C. Bureau. Finn, what's on your mind?
Well, I think it's really interesting what Aaron just said concerning Syria. As you know, we've essentially had sanctions put on place on Syria since 1979, when the U.S. designated it as a state sponsor of terrorism. It really was increased in 2011 after the Syrian civil war. And this is a pretty significant development, as you know, Major, the fact that he announced this today. But it's also significant for another reason, Major, and that is really to highlight the closeness of President Trump, the relationship that he has with MBS, with the Crown Prince. He himself said it during his remarks that it was because of his relationship with the Crown Prince, and said he was an incredible man. It just goes to show overall this trip really highlights how close these two countries are. especially if you compare it to like previous administrations, even the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, Major.
And Finn, you and I have paid a lot of attention to how candidate Trump talks about foreign policy and how President Trump talks about foreign policy. And there was a whole section in his remarks today talking about how previous interventionists in the region, not understanding the region, had tried to impose things and done more harm than good. Basically saying, I'm going to let this region sort things out on its own terms, and America will be there in a business sense, but not going to wag any fingers of condemnation about human rights or other things. That seemed to me a pretty significant part of the speech.
No, I agree, Major, and it was, and especially, again, if you compare it to, contrast it to the Biden administration, the Obama administration, even the Bush administration, where that was really, they really did have a different focus, but essentially saying, hey, hands off, you do what you want, and we will, and really kind of focusing on this isolationist perspective that the president and his administration has had since the advent of Trump 2.0. But really, we've heard him campaign on this message throughout the 2024 cycle. So it's not a surprise, but it's now a part of his execution implementing the Trump foreign policy in the Middle East region. It does come at a time of heightened tension in the region, as you know, especially with Israel and Hamas, and of course in the background we also have the Russia and Ukraine talks happening in Turkey later this week. So it's really a time where Trump's foreign policy and how much it contrasts with previous administrations really comes to fruition here. We're really seeing it under a pretty much a spotlight and really, again, showing that contrast. Major.
Finn Gómez, thanks so very much. Former Special Envoy for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, Frank Lowenstein, joins me now. Frank, it's great to have you pick up on the thing that you heard in the speech we were talking about before we went on air, that the president saying the Arabian way, the way you want to do it, how you want to develop, how you want to handle your things internally, fine by us.
Yeah, a very interesting speech in that regard. He effectively upended decades of U.S. foreign policy doctrine in the region, declaring that a values-based approach based on promoting human rights and democracy had been a failure. Whereas prior presidents went to Amman and Cairo, Trump is in Riyadh and Doha and Dubai because that's where the money is, and that's what he really wants to make the focus of this trip. And
Israel's not on this trip.
Yeah, not only is Israel not on the trip, but he's doing a whole bunch of different things that the Israelis will absolutely hate. Just recent announcement on the Syria sanctions.
Why? Tell my audience why that matters to the Israelis.
Because the Israelis are very concerned. Al-Shara, the president of Syria, was formerly the head of an ISIS-affiliated terrorist organization in Syria. So the Israelis are very, very anxious about what his real agenda.
Now, he says he's trying to turn over a new leaf, but, you know, the Israelis would be legitimately concerned about that, and still are.
There was a bit of a conversion on the road to Damascus for al-Shara.
Quite literally.
Yeah, no, exactly. He gave a whole bunch of interviews saying, hey, you know, that was in the past. And listen, I think that there's a very good case to be made that lifting sanctions is the right thing to do here, to give the Syrian economy a chance to survive, if not thrive. We were in Syria, Secretary Kerry and I, 4 or 5 times trying to persuade then President Bashar al-Assad to change his position, to come more into alignment with you know, Jordan and Egypt and less so with Iran. And the tool that we had at our disposal was the removal of sanctions. And we made the case that, hey, listen, if you demonstrate with actions that you are prepared to move in a different direction, we will reciprocate with the removal of sanctions. But there was a very clear quid pro quo there. Trump just threw all that out the window. Like, hey, you know, MBS asked me to do this. Erdogan likes the guy.
And Turkey wants some, right, exactly.
Yeah, so I'm going to just go for it without any normal interagency process or anything along the lines of what prior presidents might have done.
Talk to me about Israeli concerns about direct negotiations, Trump administration to Hamas on Idan Alexander's release, and possible implied or real pressure from the Trump administration to accept a ceasefire and a resumption of humanitarian assistance for Palestinians.
Yeah, that's a great question. It actually goes back to before Trump even took office. He put a lot of pressure on the Israelis to accept a ceasefire agreement that President Biden had not been able to get them to accept over the course of 9 months. Witkoff just showed up in Israel and told...
Steve Witkoff, special envoy.
Right, my president, you know, this is what's going to happen, and you're going to fall in line. And then they subsequently had direct negotiations with Hamas behind Israel's back. Israel found out about that through intel channels with respect to Iran Alexander and advancing the ceasefire. And then they've just done it again. They made a side deal with the Houthis, right, which effectively said, stop bombing shipping lanes that are important for commerce and U.S. economic interests, and you can continue to send missiles at Ben Gurion Airport. Really sort of a shocking deal to be made. And now, Trump has came out very publicly and said this brutal war needs to end in Gaza. He wants to get all the hostages out, and he wants a sustainable peace over there. That is exactly the opposite of what Netanyahu wants. He's planning to resume a massive ground invasion the minute Trump leaves. So, it's a whole different ballgame.
And do you think the Israelis are surprised by where they find themselves vis-a-vis Trump 2.0?
Yeah, I think they're very surprised. I think in the first term, they really got Trump to do more or less exactly what they wanted to. Ron Dermer was in the White House all the time, really, sort of dictating a lot of what our policy was going to be, recognizing Jerusalem.
And Ron Dermer is and was?
Netanyahu's chief advisor, right?
Right.
But we effectively,
and he was here last week trying to find out what the situation was going to be.
Yeah, it's a very different world than the one I think they expected to enter into, right? In the first term, Trump was foursquare with them on whatever they wanted to do. Including annexations in the West Bank, which they didn't follow through on, but Trump was supportive. So I think they expected that they would get the Trump administration to fall in line with whatever Netanyahu wanted to do. His primary goal is to bomb the Iranian nuclear facilities. Netanyahu's been very clear about that. That's exactly the opposite of what Trump is trying to do in the region. And by the way, exactly the opposite of what the Saudis and the Emiratis, another one, they don't want, whereas previously they were very hawkish on Iran. Now they want peace. They want stability because it's better for business.
And Trump, in his remarks today, and everyone is sort of sifting them in different ways. Was he being hawkish on Iran? Was he being dovish on Iran? He was being a little bit of both, saying the deal's not going to be on the table forever, but I want to make sure things are good, and I like peace, and even our former rivals are now friends of ours.
Yeah.
What does it sound like to you? And what do you think the outlines of a deal might possibly be with Iran?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would put Trump's rhetoric aside. He's been very clear, as one often should. He's been very clear that he doesn't want war with Iran right now. So to an extent, he's reciting talking points that are important, I think, for the Israelis to hear. But his actions suggest that he's looking for a deal here that would be exactly the opposite of what Netanyahu wants. That would take military action against Iran right off the table. And I think for the Israelis, it's a different ballgame politically as well.
And very quickly, that Iran deal, as you're imagining it, might look a lot like the deal that either preceded the Obama negotiated deal or the Obama negotiated deal, which Trump criticized so vehemently and pulled out of once he was in office the first time around.
Exactly. And one might ask, well, how can he enter into a deal that's far worse than the one he criticized President Biden for entering into? And the answer is he can say whatever he wants. And his people will go along with him. And no Republicans in Congress will dare criticize him. Netanyahu can't even criticize him because Trump is more popular in Israel than he is. So we're seeing a very different dynamic than the one we've seen in the past, in terms of the politics around Israel.
Frank, great to have you at the table. Thanks so much. I hope you come back.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.